There you go. Thank you. I don't know how to do it in this room. First time for you?
You see okay up there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's 6:05. I'll call the meeting to order with a roll call. I guess I'll start with myself. I'm here, Rika. Niall Garrettson.
Here.
Leslie Ng. Here. David Sandino.
Here.
And Darren Shansky, Mitchell Mariashi, and are not here, but we still have a quorum, so we can move forward. And with that, I'll go into approval of the agenda. Can everyone just take a look at the agenda for a second and let me know if there are any comments, additions, changes? If not, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
First by David. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Anyone opposed? Or wanting to?
I'm not gonna abstain.
Abstain? Okay, I'm hearing none. So with that, the agenda is approved and we can move into, usually don't we have like brief announcements? Is that just not because it's a special meeting? Or?
Yeah, that's true. We don't really usually. Although if you don't mind, if I just let everyone know, thank you so much for coming to this extra meeting. I really appreciate it. I can't stay for the whole meeting, so I apologize in advance. I have to go somewhere. But thank you. 2 commissioners came last night to Fiscal, so that was great. And I don't know if any others have been able to look at the item from last night, but really appreciated you coming to be there. I'll just mention really briefly, we're all hands on deck now. This is, the budget season, and historically what this commission has done is formed a subcommittee, and then that subcommittee would kind of drill into the document in its entirety and come up with either a list of questions or a list of questions and some particular issues. Like you might say, I'm just throwing these out there, I'd like you to find some more funding for payment, or what would it take for you to fund OPEB at 50%, things like that. That's the kind of thing that council's looking for from you, is what you think is important. So that's all. I'll just throw that out there before we get started.
Then I'll just open it up for any in-person public comments or anything submitted.
So you actually don't even have to take a general public comment at a special meeting. It's a weird rule. You only have to take it on the item of business, but it's fine. You can always do more. No problem with that.
Well, then I guess we'll just move into the proposed budget for fiscal year 25, 26, 26, 27.
Well, good evening, commissioners. Helena there, Finance Director. So we'll do a presentation on the 2-year budget, 25, 26, 26, 27 for the city. All right. Okay, so I'll start with just the general agenda of what we're going to talk about. We'll take a look at the citywide revenues and expenditures for the city. We'll go through some of the budget assumptions that were used to put together the budget. We'll go through new funding requests that were requested by various departments in the city, listing of authorized positions. We'll zoom in a little bit more on the general fund specifically. We'll do some highlights on other funds in the city, and then we'll also touch on the capital improvement program, again, for the 2-year period. All right, so I'll start with the citywide revenues, $242 million in fiscal year 25-26. In 26-27, it's going to be about $253 million. The focus is going to be, it's a 2-year budget, but we'll go through, generally speaking, to show specifics on 25-26, but on the revenue and expenditures, general composition, even though it's more, but general composition is very similar. With that, this is citywide revenue, and this shows you where the revenues for the city come from. It may seem a little odd because we usually talk about the general fund and it's the tax revenues, but when you look at citywide, it's actually charges for services, and that's primarily comes from our utilities, water, wastewater, storm drainage, and solid waste. And as you can see, of course, we have the tax revenues that follow closely. Sales tax and property tax are two top revenues for us, and both are recorded in the general fund. Property tax base is generally stable for us, have been in the city. With the sales tax, the pie this year is bigger because it accounts for the entire full fiscal year of additional sales tax, 1% of the local tax portion. So this presentation is for the citywide budgeted expenditures, presented in two different ways. One is based on which department is spending the funds, so it's by department, and the second one is by type of expenditures. So same dollar amount, just sliced in a different way. So fiscal year 26, $246 million. The largest department again ends up being utilities and operations. Again, this includes all the utility funds, hence it's why it's so big, but it also includes some other items like facility maintenance and replacement, fleet maintenance and replacement. Generally speaking, those are larger as well, so that slice of pie is bigger. And then it's followed by our engineering and transportation division, which also includes the capital projects in it, and then other the departments in the city. So as you can see, this is citywide composition and not just general fund. So we'll look at similar items but focused on general fund later in the presentation. We're a service organization, so for that reason I would say we have a lot of, on a second pie chart, it shows that salaries and benefits are about 39% across the city, and then follows by what I would call other operating expenses, which will include the contractual services and operating costs. And then we have cost allocation, very small amount of debt service, and some capital outlay. Some of the budget assumptions that were used to put together the budget. So I'll start with the labor. So it is our largest component. The City Council just recently approved our majority of our bargaining agreements. So whatever the provisions are there are incorporated in this current budget. Other post-employment benefits are set at pay-as-you-go basis. Meaning we are not contributing anything above and beyond that amount towards the unfunded liability at this point. Health premiums set up to increase 7% per year. They increase on calendar year basis, so the expectation is it's going to go about 7%. This past year, the increase was about like 9% on average. We do participate in CalPERS for the health insurance, so that's our expectation. What it actually will come out to, we don't know until a little later. We also have workers' compensation insurance costs that have gone up about $1 million this year. So there were increases in the workers' compensation rates. Operating costs, generally, because the budget is sort of tight, I would say, we only provided for the contractual increases that are included in the existing contracts that have been a lot of the times approved by council. There are some things we can't control, so those are built in, such as PG&E costs, utility costs, things like that. Wanted to touch base a little bit on the cost allocation, specifically kind of calling out general liability insurance. And that is, I'm going to say, skyrocketing across the entire state. In the first year, 26, it goes up about roughly $1 million. In the second year, the increase alone, not the total cost, but the increase was $2.2 million. So it's significant. So what we actually have done by looking at the 2-year budget was smoothed out over 2 years. So we'll collect a little more in year 1 so that it can pay for the expenses, particularly general liability premiums, in year 2. The other item is for our internal service funds. In the past, the funds accumulated a little too much reserves. So normally I would say from accounting standpoint, 3 to 4 months of operations would be standard. We had a lot more collected. So what we've been doing is gradually drawing down on those reserves. And bringing them more to what I would call a little more acceptable level. Now, this is related to operating funds, not replacement funds. So fleet replacement is not based on that. Okay. With capital and development activities, just to kind of point out that we were fairly conservative in budgeting because the last couple of years of development that occurred actually was a lot lower in terms of how much revenue they brought in compared to what we budgeted. And so we have several funds that are actually in deficit because the revenue has not come in. So we've been very conservative in budgeting because we don't want to end up further in a bigger deficit, I guess, situation, because a lot of those funds are used for capital improvements, such as roads, streets and roads and things like that. Okay. So going over a little bit of all the new funding requests, we'll start with the general fund. These are not everything, but these are probably the most notable ones that are included. For trees, in the first year, we've included an additional $278,000. This is to expand a program to assess the trees in the high occupancy zones. Second year, we double that amount. For irrigation, this is specific to parks and kind of medians in the city. We noticed that our costs for water has gone up and it's $1 million higher. So in total ends up being $2 million. So we increase in the operations for utilities in parks by $1 million. And that would be in ongoing costs. Economic development is a fairly new department in the city. We just started it maybe a year ago and actually hired an economic development director somewhere recently. So there were no really budgeted expenditures in the past. So now that we have a person and have some activity going on, we're having some budget as it relates to economic development. For homelessness, we've added about $434,000 in additional funding. So it relates to winter shelter, about non-congregate winter shelter, sorry, I have to think about pronouncing it, but about $50,000 a year. $223,000 for 8 beds at the Pulse Place, and additional funding for respite center, as well as $100,000 for encampment cleanup, which is added within the police department. Okay. Some additional funding, $30,000 in each year of the next 2 years in parks for inclusive parks programming. This was originally started in '25, and so we are continuing that on. Council somewhat recently approved the crossing guard contracts, so this adjusts for what the contract amount is, being increased by $188,000. Now, the crossing guard contract is funded 50% with 50% by the city, 50% by school district. So half of the total contract will receive its revenue. The city also gets about 3% for administrative costs. We had some regulatory cleanup within the city at 5th and G Street, and so we have about $300,000 added because it's just starting. So the staff is working with State Resource Control Board, where they are they were doing more of a testing, and now with the consultant assistance, we kind of have some like general estimate on what we think the costs will be. They could be more, they could be less, but this is an estimate right now.
What is that? Just out of curiosity. I'm trying to picture it.
It's a prior redevelopment site that the city took on, and there was some, I guess, hazmat related cleanup that has to be done.
Is it the woodworking shop? Or the,
Isn't it under the USDA? I have
oh,
the
it's
same
like-
thing, and I'm not really quite
Oh,
sure.
okay,
I don't
interesting.
think it's where Hibbert's was. It's-
Okay.
I just know it's in downtown, so.
okay.
So, I'm not sure of the location exactly, but, and as I mentioned, some contractual increases, associated with just a variety of things, like technology is going up, so paying for software and things like that, and rental costs. So those were general funds. There were some, requests that came out from non-general fund or other funds within the city. Public safety radio operational cost is paid by our IT department. That was left out of the baseline budget, and so it's being added back. We pay that cost to the Sacramento County. It's part of the regional kind of regional package that comes with it. We have some additional IT-specific licensing agreements, Microsoft, things like that increasing the costs and whatnot, so those were included, as well as for the PCS, took up the full recovery fee study. Police in-car radios, $30,000. That one is going to be using the grant funds, but it's added as well. Let's see, solid waste, we have increased by solids disposal costs, so just in general, costs are increasing, so additional budget for that. Within water fund, a few divisions there have some specialized vehicles, and so $300,000 added for that. Old landfill site cleanups are another one, but that one is using the solid waste fund dollars, so $200,000 a year there. So those were kind of more of the major additions that were requested and approved and now included in the budget. And so this gives you an authorized position listing and what we changed. So 24-25 is where we are today. In the upcoming year, parks, aquatics maintenance technician is being added. As a new position, we have not enough staff right now to take care of the pools and things like that we have in the city, but we are also adding a splash pad at the park here, and so an additional person is added to assist with all the maintenance. In addition, City Council approved a police officer for the downtown enforcement area, so that police officer is being added and funded in this upcoming budget. In the second year, we have two staff added within utilities division, so both in wastewater funds, so it's assistant collections and public works maintenance worker, as well as one person finance assistant in finance, also funded by utilities. So we haven't really increased staffing in finance on a revenue side since probably 2015 or so. And so we've acquired additional utility accounts, and so have a lot more people, and we'll have a number coming on board as well. So we add an additional person. And again, this is all paid for by the utility funds. So there are a number of requests that came in from departments asking for additional staffing from a variety of actual departments. So I'm not going to go specifically through the list, but you can see that there were other departments that requested positions. Now, these were not approved and are not in the budget. There's quite a few here. As I mentioned, we'll kind of zoom in a little bit more on the general fund, and so this gives you a summary of the general fund. If you want to see details in the budget book that was attached, it provides more detailed information, but I would like to focus, I guess, primarily on the ending fund balance. City Council's policy generally to maintain 10 to 15%. At the December meeting, when we met with council just to see like, okay, where do you want us to be? And the goal was to try and replenish fund balance within 2 to 3 year period. Unfortunately, our resources are not as abundant as we would like them to be. So we were able to maintain it at 10% for both years, and so that's where we stand there. But we have obviously received summaries of the revenues and expenditures, and it's improved. Our fund balance is calculated based on total expenditures for the year. So it's a percentage of expenditures and transfers out. As the expenditures grow, the fund balance will grow as well. With that, just to go over a little bit of a general tax revenue assumptions that were included. As I mentioned earlier, property tax base is pretty stable and solid within the city, but we do have included 3.5% and 3.8% increases in the next 2 years. The statutory increase for Prop 13 is 2%, but because of the transfer of ownership within the city, you know, it catches up with the market value and assessed values in that case, and so that makes up the other portion of the increase. With sales and use tax, we worked with the consultants and we expect a slowing down in sales tax increases, so we only projected 1% and 2.7% later on in year 2. So all really dependent, the sales tax is very dependent on the economy within the state, within obviously the nation as a whole. Same assumptions were utilized for the local tax. That's just been there. Transient occupancy tax, or hotel tax, also known for that, is expected to have 3% increase. So this gives you kind of a pie chart of where the general fund revenue is coming from. And as you can see, the large piece for us is property taxes. The next big one is sales tax, which includes the local tax as well. We have some program revenues, which is the third largest one, and that's going to be the fees that we collect for, let's say, recreational programs, planning fees, things like that. So literally a chargeable service the city provides. And then there's other types of revenues, including taxes that have their own slides to just kind of show for comparison purposes. General fund expenditures by department. So we earlier saw the pie chart that was citywide. This is very specific to the general fund, and this is where we spend the general fund dollars in each department. As you can see, the largest, or about 50% of it, is police and fire. And then the remaining ones will be in the other departments, but Parks and Community Services is probably the third largest one. And that includes the recreational programs, parks, and aquatics. So with that, just to kind of highlight some of the things about other funds in the city. So we have utility funds, water and storm drainage, that are pretty stable in terms of revenues. I would say 2 or 3 years ago, Storm Drainage Fund went out and did their ballot measure to increase the charges for its services, which have been approved. So actually brought this particular fund out of deficit spending. The revenues are actually in that fund being accumulated for future capital activities that need to be done in the city. There's some work that goes on for design currently, but there's an accumulation of resources that is expected to happen. With the wastewater, you remember just a few meetings ago, I think maybe a couple of months ago, we brought in and requested an increase 5% for revenues in the wastewater fund. That's now included in the budget as well. As I mentioned earlier, conservative revenue projections for development impact fees, or development-related fees in general. I will say that I would probably say the larger concerns that we have, or I have, relates to building admin and permits fund. Part of the reason why I say that is for financial reporting purposes. That fund is rolled up with the general fund together. So if you were to look at a financial statement, so the ACFR, for the city in those years, you may see the amount being lower, but on the financial statement, it is lumped together with this particular fund. Because it's generally considered a general fund. And as I mentioned earlier, development impact fees, particularly streets and roads related and public safety, currently in a deficit position because we expected greater revenues for projects that are ready to come in, been approved by the city. However, the developers are not the ones that are starting it for a variety of reasons. They have financing issues, interest rates are high, not sure what's going to happen with tariffs and the economy in general, so they're holding back and holding off on moving forward with construction. With the capital improvement program, I want to stress out, this is a 2-year program that's listed in here, so it's not individual years, it's a combination of both. So in 2 years together, we expect to spend about $37 million, or at least budgeting new dollars of about $37 million. So we have prior budgets that may not have been spent, so the spending will continue, but this is brand new dollars added. As you can see, 66% of new dollars will be spent on streets and roads. And I'll, in the next slide, will show what are some of the larger projects. But as you can see, our water, wastewater, and storm water facility utilities have the next largest expenditures as it relates to capital. So here's a list of projects that are budgeted and they're over $750,000. There are some smaller ones, but we've included just a list of some of the major ones. You'll see we're adding over 2-year period pavement maintenance, $9.5 million. Cool pavement projects, again, it's streets and roads related, but it's also grant funded, so it includes grant funding in it, $8 million. Cowell Boulevard improvements, and then some of the major ones as it relates to the utilities. Okay. So the next steps for us, so we're meeting with you today to solicit whatever questions or comments you may have on the budget. City Council has a budget workshop that's scheduled on Tuesday, May 27th at the Senior Center if you would like to come and listen to it. It's from 3:30 to 5:30, so it's a distinct 2-hour window. Then there's also June 3rd meeting that's scheduled for budget discussion if needed. And our expectation is to bring the budget for adoption to council on June 17th. So with that, I'm going to return it back to you. That concludes my presentation, so for questions or comments that you may have.
Does anyone have any questions or clarifying questions or comments?
I have a couple high-level ones.
Sure.
I'm just curious, since obviously you know the budget way better than I do, could you call out, you know, 1 or 2, maybe 3 areas that you think are sort of the biggest problem areas? And also, what are the areas where you think there's maybe the most room for improvement, or things look the best, or there's the brightest outlook?
Let's see. I think I'm going to say not problem areas, but I think that causes concern for me. I think I mentioned it several times. The funds that are in deficit, because that means, one, we did not allocate any additional spending for those out of those funds, but they're also in deficit, which means because we don't know when development is going to come in, a lot of them are development related, those funds will continue being in deficit until additional revenue is collected. That also means that the general fund is carrying those funds, the deficits in those funds, until such time that we actually collect the revenues. So Is that concerning to me? Yes, which is part of the reason why we were conservative in saying we're not going to assume rosy projections on the revenues. We would like for them to come in. We would like to see that development and revenue coming in, but just decided that as it happens, those items will be brought to council at that point in time in order to appropriate. But I already told everybody, first I have to make sure I cure the deficit before we go and spend it. So I would say that as a concern. I think it's important to point out if we did not have a 1% additional tax, this would have been a very different conversation. So you probably have seen, we have some communities nearby that are having difficulties. So if we did not have, I mean, if you were to look at it and say, take out, our assumption was that $12 million will be collected with a new additional 1%. If you take that out, that's a $12 million we would have to cut out of the budget, and that would include a serious service reductions in the city. So I guess positive part for me, that certainly is a good thing. So I think that's concern and I guess positive outlook. I think we still have a lot more work to do because we've been in a council meeting yesterday, did a presentation. Council's been looking for additional funding for streets and roads. Unfortunately, it's kind of, the budget is tight already, so if we want to add it in a particular area, pick one. Doesn't matter if it's streets and roads or something else, that just means we have to take the money from somewhere else. So it's a give and take, I guess. So if there's a proposal saying, hey, we want more of this, then my question would be right back in return, okay, where would you like to take it from? So I think that's part of the, message was it's bittersweet. We are hoping the economy is going to stay well or somewhat well. So certainly additional sales tax dollars are good, but it also means it's volatile because it is going to be in line with what the economy is doing. So property tax is a lot more stable compared to sales tax. So as you see ups and downs in the economy, the sales tax is going to reflect that for sure. So if it goes down, we're not going to get as much sales tax. We're already at 10% on the general fund side, so we have to be careful. So.
Do you mind if I just add just one thing that has come up for us too, because you were asking, like, is there any give, right? And as Elena said, it's such a tight, constrained budget, but there is close to $1 million that City Council had previously allocated to be used toward Crisis Now to help the county with the implementation of that program. Long story short, that program has evolved very substantially, and it's probably not going to be implemented the way it was envisioned. So we have $930-some thousand that is set aside that we now know really isn't going to be used for that purpose. The county might do something much smaller, much simpler on a pilot basis that might be $125,000 for year one. So we have this little bit of money there, and council, we discussed last night reallocating it, and there's some tension there because some may feel that even if we reallocated it, it should go for its original intention, which is to support mental health services. Others may feel no, there's no obligation to use it for anything other than what we choose to use it for. So that's something you may want to discuss as you're thinking about where is there any give, because there's not very much give anywhere else, really. So
maybe if I could ask just one follow-up. Obviously the administration's been very hostile towards research universities, and I'm curious, is there any concern about that having some sort of impact, knock-on impact to UC Davis through to the city through UC Davis, custom funding services or reduction in grants, things like that?
Not really. I think it's more impacting the city for any grants that the city specifically is applying for.
Okay.
So for example, we have some police grants that have not been budgeted because my understanding from the police department, the feds pulled some of the grants, so they're just not available. So none of the grants were budgeted for that. I mean, I guess technically that also means they don't do certain things that could have been done via grants, and either they're being done or envisioned to be done through general fund paying for them, or they're not just going to be completed. A lot of them are either, in some cases, equipment purchases, sometimes it's more of overtime type of funded grants for, like, let's say, do like checkpoints, or you might know them as click it or ticket, that type of stuff. So that type of services. A lot of the grants that are for us that are currently authorized, my understanding from departments is, as long as they're obligated, we should still keep them. However, there is a concern that future grants may not be available, particularly as it comes to the climate and adaptation plan, because we have a plan, but we may not have as many grants that might be available as the city may have thought of in the past. So I would say it's more of the grants that are specific to the city. We don't really receive many grants from UCD. They sometimes do contribute to projects, but usually as those projects are developed and kind of discussed, then it's a conversation with UCD to see if they have the ability to contribute. So then there's usually a limit that is in place for. Do you have a question, Leslie?
Yeah, I have a few. And please tell me if you feel like this is not related enough to this specific budget. But the thought I've been having is, like you expressed concern about the low revenues from development projects, and you explained that a lot of that is coming from projects that like we're not moving forward just because of sort of like economic instability. And Vice Mayor Neville, I know last night at the council meeting you talked about the development impact fees and how those have to be assessed in conjunction with a study, like an impact assessment. What is the process for initiating one? Because, you understand.
So it'll be starting, it'll start with council approval in conjunction with the general plan. I don't know exactly what stage of the general plan, though. I'm not sure I know.
Well, the city just recently selected a consultant and starting to work with a consultant for the general plan update. Usually general plan update does take some time to get through, but it usually is a plan for the next, I would say 20 years for the city. It's like what the vision for the city is and what the development areas will be. And with that, usually then you have certain projects in mind, certain areas that will be under the development, and so then the fee is determined, like, okay, what is the cost would be, what the fee should be set at in order to bring that development in, or the cause of what the development will actually do to the city, and then it's setting the fees, usually working with a consultant. But we have looked at it just because ours was done so long ago, the general plan update, that the city is kind of feeling that, okay, we actually need to figure out what is it we're going to, envision development to be, in order to set the, revise the fee or update the fees. What is it actually going to be for?
So Leslie, I was just gonna say the more immediate problem isn't so much the amount of the fee, but the really substantial delays in two major development projects that would have brought in close to $6 million, I think, in development impact fees. That alone is a big dent in the budget.
Yeah.
And it's because they can't get their financing together.
I see. Yeah.
So it's not the city's fault that the development is not starting, because everything is approved, it's ready to go from a city's perspective.
Right.
It's the developer that can't really move forward with it for whatever variety of reasons that are outside of the city's control.
That makes sense. Thank you. Another question I had was about the, you pointed out there's an additional staff added to finance. Is that at all related to like getting the ACFRs up No, okay.
In that particular case, that one person is strictly a revenue. So it's the staff that when you call and you have an issue with utility bills, you call in and ask for assistance or want to make a payment, things like that. We currently have over 16,000 accounts that only 6 people handle. And we expect some additional accounts that will be brought in. We have Redwood's recent one that is coming. There's some areas that currently are billed as one bill to the county where they requested that they want to have individual bills, so that's going to expand our customer base. But we don't have enough people to cover all the requests and calls that are coming in. It's the call handling and all that stuff. So that's the person that's being added there. In fiscal year 25, current year, just at mid-year, a couple of months ago, finance requested to have 2 accounting positions added, and they are limited term positions. So what that means is we hire them for a 2-year period just to help us catch up, and then they will be gone. So they're limited on the terms with the city. So they were added. We are in the process of recruiting for those positions right now, and it's literally out, so if you know anybody, please, we'd be happy to get them. But they weren't, so because of the period of time till June 30th, and who knows how long the recruitment process will take, we didn't expect them, so we didn't actually request any additional budget for fiscal year 25 because we have savings right now, even if we start on time, like early within 25 years. There's not an additional request for that, but they are added in fiscal year 26 and 27 because that would be new positions added.
When those, that's awesome, thank you for the update. And then when those financial statements are back up to date with like the help that you need, will that theoretically open up more like grant opportunities for the city to increase revenue?
It could, but it really depends on what grants the cities are applying for. And I mean, usually if they're competitive grants, yes. I think the city is going to be more current. We're still receiving grants, some of them delayed in some cases, but there are certain grants that we receive in general. There are some competitive grants, particularly when it comes to, I think, Caltrans are the ones that where they don't want us to necessarily submit a request for, to apply for a grant.
Thank you. That's not bad.
Did you have any questions, David?
I do, actually. Well, let me double check. I want to be sensitive to people's time. So what are you thinking in terms of time? There's only one item on the agenda. Is the goal to get out of here, I assume, by 8 o'clock? Or is it earlier?
I think 8 o'clock would be ideal, but, but if you have questions, please, go for it.
Okay, I will. I want to be sensitive to time though, so, and I'm also, because it's an informal setting, that if I raise a question, I mean, I'm interested in staff's opinion, but if others want to follow up on that, I favor that, right? Rather than going around Darius, if you want to jump in sooner, please do. You can go back. So that's my process question for tonight, and we've got public too that may want to weigh in, so sensitive to that. And then I have a process question, so I'm glad slide 20 is still up there. So it leaves out, which I believe could have been important, was our meeting on June 4th. Isn't there, that was what I thought was the strategy would be that we're meeting tonight. We can provide comments now, but there's also an option to have, which had been a practice in the past of the Budget and Finance Commission, to have a subcommittee take a look at it and not, really dig into it, not just until 8 o'clock, and being able to research it. And then that subcommittee could come back at the June 4th entire Fiscal Commission meeting, and then present this to the entire commission and see what suggestions are out there and whether those are endorsable or not by the entire commission. That's been the process in the past. The big hiccup is the recent council position that before we do subcommittee stuff, we have to go to the council and get approval. I don't know if that's the case. Donna, you're here for
Not
this?
here, yeah,
It's
not on this one.
Not on this one?
We
So-
want you doing this. This is our request, yeah.
Okay, so this one's okay, if that's what we wanna do. So my idea would be, that's a good idea, to do that, and then it would allow the folks on that subcommittee to dig into this in more detail at their leisure. That subcommittee may not come up with anything better than tonight. It might, but it might. So, and I put out there, I'd be interested in doing that, being on that subcommittee. But I don't have to. If others feel that strongly about it, I would defer to your interests. So that's what I think. I think that June 4th should be up there, and that's a key, and that would be then an opportunity to provide more cogent comments than we have tonight. So fair enough?
That's fine.
And then, part of that would be, I think, a commitment by staff to address any reasonable comments. We put a time, because your time's important, but like maybe we wouldn't ask for more than an hour or something to that line if we had questions that only you could address and could do it effectively. So I put that as an issue there, the impact on staff. So I put that out there for folks to think about it. We can discuss about it as a full commission, or now, if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I mean, are there other folks who'd be open to, coming together as a subcommittee and discussing this? I think I'd be in favor of that being created.
And we're on a short fuse. We're gonna have to get back, by June 4th, and then.
Yeah, but given that not everybody would be able to be a part of the subcommittee, I think it would be helpful to just get, it's just three.
It's just three.
So that's why maybe, any comments, we can just kind of gather whatever initial comments folks have here, and then whoever wants to volunteer for the subcommittee could, take a deeper dive.
So you're interested in that? Is it?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess we can decide that later if we want, but I'm interested. So, that's the process question, and then kind of dig into the slides, and I'll watch the clock here, because I do have questions. But I want to start with the overarching. I think you started with it, Donna and Elena. The question for me is, how can this commission, or even the council, make useful comments and useful changes, given what I see? This is not a great observation, but given what I see, that a lot of this is already baked in on things that are beyond the control over a meeting by the council on the 17th. So I'll give you a couple examples, and you push back if I'm wrong. So start with, so go to slide 3. I get my numbers right. Yeah, so this is the revenue, citywide budget revenue, and what I see is it's a good slide. That's a lot of money, 240 million. Basically, that's baked in now as a given. That's the amount, you're making an interpretation, a projection of that, but essentially what the sales tax is, what the charge for services is, what the property tax is, you're basing that on reasonable assumptions. I guess we could question the assumptions. I find the assumptions reasonable, so I'm not questioning them. We could, I guess, but so if there's some ideas, for instance, well, at a simple level, we got to increase revenue. This is not the forum to do it during this budget analysis. The forum will come later through the year, whether it's for development fees, whether it's cannabis, that comes later. Do you agree with that? That we're this is what we're given to start with, and that's a good projection of what the revenue is.
Well, I agree. You can certainly question the assumptions used, so that will determine to increase or decrease the revenues that are presented. This is our expectation, what the revenue is going to be.
Yeah.
Again, the assumptions that are used are more related on, let's call it property tax, sales tax, like I said, tax related. Charges for services, the council just approved the master fee schedule that has been reviewed by you earlier as well. So that assumes for the charges for services, so departments make projections based on those revenues that were approved. So I would say this is what we think is going to be received. Again, you can question the assumptions if you have questions about that, or if you think that they need to be changed. Really, I think the process is, this is what we think the resources are for the year. How we're going to spend the resources, right? So it's more probably of a next slide where you can question or determine, okay, you want more of this or that, but this is the resource that you have right now.
Yeah.
Be mindful, you're looking at citywide revenues. So for example, charges for services for water, wastewater, storm drainage, solid waste, you can't use it anywhere but in those funds.
Yeah, so, and those are set, that 40% of the budget is set through that process. And again, I think that's even more locked in because it's a fee for service. And that calculation, is complicated and goes through different processes. So, all right, I'm gonna hear that you generally agree with what I'm saying. So we're, that revenue projection is what it is, and we could perhaps debate some of the assumptions. As I said, I find them reasonable, but take a look at slide 14 where you have the assumptions. So my only question on this, and I think, as I said, I find them reasonable. It could be range, I could debate some of these maybe, but we just had a month ago a presentation relating to village farms and the assumptions relating to that project in terms of revenue generation and how it might have impact on the general fund. So my question would be, are these assumptions, do you believe, consistent with those assumptions? And my guess is yes, but it seems to me they should be in alignment.
So these assumptions are for the next 2 years. Village Farms assumes several years out. So this Village Farms is far beyond the revenue assumptions that are here.
Totally understood that, but you have assumptions for 26 and 27. Village Farms included that, didn't it, in its assumptions, and it had how it was looking at it. So I'm just asking if you think they're in alignment or they're not alignment.
I don't think they can be compared because this is properties that are currently built and in place.
Yeah.
Village Farms is not even started. So this is property taxes that will be collected at some point in time.
I get it, but it was making projections in terms of what the property taxes, what the economy would be, what
But
additional
I
revenue.
believe it was beyond this time frame.
But you're saying we don't even know if Village Farm is happening.
Yes, one,
we
we
can't-
don't know if it's gonna happen, but two, whatever projections they use was years outside of this
Yeah.
timeframe.
Okay,
So I think your point is going to be relevant potentially when we are looking at a long-range projection that's going to be 20, 30 years that would potentially include Village Farms. If we choose to include Village Farms as a project, development project, as part of the long-range projection.
Yeah, I'm actually not asking that, but that's a valid question and a fair inference from what I'm asking. What I was asking is, we're making assumptions here, and Village Farms also made assumptions. Your pushback is, well, Village Farms assumptions don't come in until after fiscal year 2027, that's what I'm hearing. So if that's the case, then I hear your answer. My thought is that whatever assumptions here, they should be consistent with any other kinds of products that come out of the city, either through staff or consultant. So I'm hearing you think they're consistent, so I accept that, right? That's what you're proposing here. So I didn't look at the Village Farms analysis, but I think that would be appropriate for the subcommittee to take a look at, just to make sure, hey, we're telling the public that when we're making revenue assumptions, this is kind of the standard. I do recall asking Matt, what did he think about his assumptions? And I said, well, these conservative assumptions, and his answer was, no, they're not conservative, they're reasonable assumptions. And you could have had a range of assumptions, and he didn't feel that was worth the trouble. So I understand that. Okay, so you have that. Let me go to move on to another part of the story, I believe. that's critical to what I'm suggesting is that a lot of this is kind of baked in. It's like a geometry question. You got these postulates, you can't change them. Take a look at slide 11. So slide 11 is the authorized position listing. So we have 380 city employees, and then the proposal over the next couple of years is to add, make some changes up to 26, 27, adding 5 positions total, a couple of them limited term. Okay, so my observation is that's pretty small change in city personnel given the size of the city, and given in 2008, 2009 period, we were well over 400 employees. So it's still to me, a modest increase. That's how I see it. And each one of these positions do add cost, and you address that. But on a big picture, so take a look now, see if I have my numbers right. Take a look, remember these numbers, about 380 employees. Take a look at slide, I guess it's slide 4. Go back to slide 4. So right there. So this is expenditures 2025, 26. Okay, is this too simple? Look to the slide, the pie chart to the right. It says benefits, salaries and benefits, 39.4%. I rounded that to about 40%. If you take that 40% and multiply it by the 246, let's just say 250 million to be, would that give us an approximate on terms of city expenditures for salaries and benefits?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, so that's about $100 million, and you can add the new employees. It's a pretty small impact in my opinion, but it is an impact. And then focus the eyes on the contractual services. You have 6.2%, and for those contractual services, I believe those are services that are consulting services or other services that advance city goals, right? That's where it says contractual services. These aren't services for capital projects, building something, or for equipment.
Some are, so let's say fee studies or audit work, we're paying auditors, so that would fall under construction.
Auditors is, okay, another consult. So this is, been one of the vexing questions for me all along, and it's not answerable for this, but we could raise it is that you have 6.2% for contractual service, and I query what that means. You could look at the city council agendas and see the kind of consulting services that are being approved. And some of them are reimbursable, I believe, especially for the developers, but there's still impacts and could be considered. And the question that is raised should be, are these consulting contractual services, is that the most effective and the most efficient way to provide city government? And so with 6% contractual services, you're talking about $15 million and multiply that by the 250. And could that money be better spent as actually in terms of employees, or should it go the other way? I'm not sure, but I think that debate really needs to be forefront in any kind of.
But some of the contractual service, like audit, the city can't audit itself. You have to have.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you can break it down, but you can go through the contractual service. You just gave one example. There's about a bunch of examples where you could have the services that were provided by the city. So yeah, that's true. It's part of it. It's more complicated. I'm just giving you a gross analysis that usually isn't raised. That if you can look at the contractual services, they're on the consent agenda most of the time. From a strategic management standpoint, this should be always the issue. What are we doing with our outside consultants? Just for a basic management issue, because they cost money, they're expensive, they can be very useful, don't get me wrong. There's things that they're providing that city staff couldn't provide, or they provide more efficiently and then they do their job and leave. So it's very strategic, but I do think it's an issue that needs to be talked about, especially with going back to 2008, 2009, when there was over 450 city employees. Things have changed. So I want to just point that out. So I wanted to go back to my slide. Back to what we can do. Go back to the slide with the city's staff. So back to slide 11. So this is where I believe we're way beyond our scope. These decisions about the 380 employees and how we got there is a history and a management decision that we don't have the ability to process and see if you agree with this. This is another one of these things that I think are really baked into it, that whether or not we should have the additional parks and community service position or another position for finance or two or less positions, this is really imperative of city management, through the city manager working with the department heads to make sure that they have the proper work allocation with the work that needs to be done and with the employees that are capable of doing that, plus whatever is contracted with the consultant. So, you know, whether it's zero-based budgeting, some do that, but I don't think that necessarily is a good way to do it. But that information there, to me, is pretty difficult for this commission to even comment on. And then bring it back to the other slides. So we're talking about $100 million of the budget that is basically beyond our scope. So that's what I see. But pushback, I think I'm wrong on that.
Please go ahead. I was just gonna say, I appreciate your thoughts around this too, but I would just suggest that the police position, for example, the addition of the new police officer, that is not a request that came to us from the police department. That is not a request that was generated based on a need the police department believed it had. They have plenty of needs and they can't fill existing positions. They have a very difficult time filling positions, but that came about as a result of very, very intense pressure from the downtown business community. Just so you know, didn't come about.
I heard that.
Didn't
Yeah,
come about
I
through
understand that.
fiscal analysis. It was
Yeah.
political pressure. So yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I mean that kind of furthers what I'm saying. It's difficult for us to provide, or maybe just difficult for me to provide any meaningful input on this huge part of the expenditure side of the budget because it's so intertwined with how the city is structured and its personnel and its outside services. So I guess other commissioners could weigh in, but I mean, these kinds of things probably, I don't know if we could be useful on any kind of those comments, and that's why we're kind of looking, what can we do to provide input? I mean, I'm hearing, which I think is true, hey, that extra police person, extra police officer is gonna add a couple $100,000 to the budget on an ongoing basis and be aware of that, but that decision has been presented for other reasons at the request of city businesses, that kind of thing. So I guess what could we be useful to provide on comments for this?
Well, okay. So this presentation in general in the next couple, 2 or 3 weeks, right? This is the whole thing of, okay, we're setting the budget up for the next 2 years. This is up for discussion and potentially change, right? If you want to. So, I mean, I guess I would say, I'm gonna go extreme, so don't take it any particular way, but I guess to make a point. Let's say you would come out and say, I'm gonna take police officers as an example. City council, we don't recommend you to add it because we understand you had some political pressure, but we don't think, no, you're advising city council, right? That's what maybe your advice is, right? They can either take it or they can say, well, thank you for letting us know. we'll move forward with that. Maybe you're gonna look at it, again, I'm saying, just to prove a point, I guess, you could look at it and say, social services and housing, right? We've added police department, but, this is really a responsibility of a county, so why is the city involved in it? Just, so, could you say that? Yes, you could. Now, that's how you might look at it and determine that potentially and provide your feedback on the budget to the city council.
Yeah.
They can take your feedback and figure out, okay, yes, you have some valid points in this, but maybe, thank you for your concern and, looking at it from a certain standpoint, and we thank you, but we're not going to follow what you, the commission, said. But this supposed to be, in my opinion, is the conversation right now of what is going in the budget, what you may want to change, what you may want to reallocate, call it that way. When we're looking at it from, maybe you're going to say, you know what, we're not gonna fund that police officer, we wanna put that $240,000 towards streets and roads instead. Right, again, this is your review, your advice to, or how you look at it, the budget and recommendation to council. They can take it, they can leave it, I guess, the way I look at it.
So, well, that's kind of you, so what I'm hearing is there's still input possible on something like that, and it may be useful. I would point out then, what I see as a supreme complexity of this, why I don't know if it would be that useful. There's 90 positions, they would add it to 91. I don't know enough about the police department with 90 positions and whether or not that department has any excess capacity to do something in the downtown. Maybe it doesn't, but that's all a management decision, right, for the department and the city manager. And then go to the previous slide 10. So slide 10, oops. I'm sorry, I must have been, go to the next slide, so it's to be slide 12. So, to me, the additional positions that got the, at least proposed approval, they're in competition with all of these positions that were requested but not included. And you can see there's a dozen plus of these, and how would a commission be able to provide meaningful input on weighing whether or not that just use that as an example, that downtown police officer.
So are you saying you need more information?
What's that?
Are you saying you need more information around why certain positions are chosen?
Well, absolutely, I would need more information, but I'm also saying, what I'm saying is the information is beyond our scope and ability to provide anything meaningful. Because of this complexity, I believe that, I'm assuming the city did its hard work on this, and they went through, the city manager and the department heads went through this analysis, and they looked at the additional budget costs that they approved, but they also looked at the positions that were requested not approved. That'd be part of the budget, but they're also weighing in exactly what they believe is the biggest need for the city. I know, for instance, that there's a whole group in the city that's really upset about the urban forest. They would love more urban forest technicians and probably say, we need those more than we need a police officer. So those kinds of things, to me, are debated and should be debated within the city manager and the department heads, and then presented to council, and not something that we would have easy access to look at. That happens, right? The department heads make their proposals to the city manager. That gets all discussed internally as to whether or not any of these emerge as potential new positions. Is that?
Well, each department goes through their, obviously, requests. So these departments, and the ones that obviously were approved, asked for positions, right? Whichever positions they had. So, as we know, we have a finite amount of resources.
Yeah.
So the point was, okay, prioritizing out of all the requests, to prioritize, I would love to fund them all, but I'm not a federal government who prints money, right? So we only have so much, and so we have to pick and choose, or really it's the city managers, gather all the information from all the departments, what they need, and figure out, is there, prioritizing health and safety, right? And the ability to make sure that we can serve the public, so based on the resources we have available. So every single department would love to have an additional person, and so you have a list here. And if you probably give them unlimited resources, they probably would have 400 total employees for the city. But we don't have it, so, you know, so we can live in a dream world, I guess. But, so the positions that were approved were, I'm gonna quote, vetted out to a point like, okay, we have to have it because we can't have, call it splash pad, and not enough people to actually maintain it. And it's going to take some work. We have enough people to maintain currently the pools that we have in a sufficient manner, so that's part of it, and we just added an additional feature, right? So that's why this was selected as, okay, we need to have an additional position that relates or does work specifically on that. Like I said, the police officer was added because the council already said, okay, we want that in there.
Yeah.
Now, it's gonna be your prerogative to say, well, we don't think this is important, we think urban forestry is going to be more important. So that could be a recommendation coming out from commission. Again, it's an advisory board, so I can't tell you what the council will decide about that. At the meeting yesterday, one of the discussion items was the fact that they want to have urban forestry as a program brought back to council and looked at it more holistically, not just, you know, in silos type of thing. So that's going to be, I think, a bigger discussion. Sounds like more like August, September timeframe, perhaps. There was discussions of how do we deal with homelessness, right? That item is supposed to be brought up as well. So there's a lot of, I think, intertwining between various programs and how it is allocated. But I guess in terms of what was approved, we were looking at, okay, where among all departments, where's the greatest need? Whether it relates to health and safety of either citizens or employees, whatever it is, how can we help, and what are the resources available? It's easier, frankly, to add positions in utilities because we can increase rates and fund those, right? We can't do that same thing when it comes to general fund. We're limited on how we can raise revenues, tax revenues specifically, so we can only have so much. And so I would never recommend saying like, okay, well, let's just add all of the fire positions, which is going to be a full burden of general fund. I don't have that much money to give to.
Yeah, I totally get that. And these, by the way, look to me like all general fund positions, which reinforces your point. So my point then, I feel we've talked enough about that. These kinds of things are complicated decisions, and we should commission any recommendation should be aware of that and proceed cautiously because these things are pretty much baked. And these complicated decisions, I'm glad that the city did that kind of analysis. So let me just, can I go about 5 more minutes? Would that be okay? We're okay? Okay, I'm gonna change the subject. Go to slide 19. So, you know, so this is the hottest issue in terms of what people, average person talks about, including my neighborhood, is the pavement maintenance. So we just, in March, I guess in March, February, we heard from the update on the pavement plans, which sound reasonable and trying to move forward. So the question I think folks would want to know is, okay, so we have a capital improvement projects. The biggest expense is on pavement maintenance, and I think people generally would appreciate that. But there's also some other expenses too. And I'm wondering then, how does the explanation of that priority? Was it a determination that all these capital improvements were essential during that time period and couldn't be deferred for the next capital improvement period, 27, 28, 29, and consequently, if they were deferred, there would have been more money available for pavement maintenance. So how do these judgments made that these are all planned for the next capital improvement project cycle?
So, well, I'm gonna start first with restricted funds.
Yeah.
So, if we don't do water main replacement or water well, 30 manganese treatment or elevator tank, all of the, or any and all, right? I can't take that money and say, oh, we're gonna allocate it to bringing maintenance. It's a restricted fund, it can only be used in water. Same thing is gonna be for wastewater, it can only be used
So
in
so some of those are coming out then of the special funds, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
So,
so those are top.
Can't use, so the only fund that can fund just about anything, which primarily is going to be your pavement and things like that, is going to be general fund.
Yeah,
So that's the only fund that you can use the funds out of to fund just about anything in the city, even if you want to give money to water. I would certainly not recommend it, because water can sustain itself if they need to, but it's only the general fund. So, the list of capital projects that departments submitted was, compared to what was put in the budget, I believe that was 3 times longer in each year. A lot of them were related to general fund funding. We only had, as you could see, in year one, $4.2 million.
so there's capital improvement projects that didn't make the cut.
There are lots of them that did
okay.
not.
So this is another example of a complicated story. That was my point, it's pretty complicated. And I don't know how much the commission could dig in that, but we could provide help to explain some of these. And just that point that you made, that not all of these projects are funded by the general fund. They have a different fund source, and it makes it easier for them to proceed. They're not competing. So, okay, you've answered what I wanted there. Let me move on then to the next question on the reserve and the policy to have a 15% reserve. That's the goal, and it's not part of this budget to go completely in that direction. There's going to be a goal of 10% plus or minus. So my question to you is, are there any consequences to the city, financial, I mean, there's a consequence if we need to draw those reserves. Okay, we have a lesser reserve fund, I get that. But is there any other consequences to the city by not achieving that 15% reserve? For instance, is there any consequence on financial disclosures or financial statements or bond sales or anything else that might affect, I don't know, the city bond rating, anything that could have a negative consequence? If so, I think that should be considered.
Well, I think in general, if city were to decide to issue bonds, specifically on not, I would say, enterprise type, because when it's enterprise, it looked at that particular enterprise. So if it's water, it looks at water. If it's wastewater, it looks at wastewater. So this is more of what I'm going to call general fund supported debt. So the larger the reserve, the better. So regardless how you look at it. So the more funds you have in reserve, the more favorably you look, the credit rating is going to be greater. And that means you have lower interest rates. So it's all interconnected if you choose to issue bonds. I would say in terms of, for me, if I'm thinking about it, if something happens, right, and things happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to be super extreme of saying like, I don't know, earthquake or flood or whatever it is. But if something happens, that 10% that you see right now, which is $10 million, is the only thing that the city has to potentially go to. So how, so 16%, 16.6% is roughly covers, let's say, 3 months. If we have a dip in the economy, don't have to go far, right? Because right now, I'm not sure if I can predict what's going to happen anywhere. But if we have a dip in the economy, how long will it last us? Yeah. So the high, greater reserve you have, the more time you have to react. The less dollars you have, the less reaction time you have, and then it becomes an emergency, I guess I would say.
Yeah, so I get that. So that's definitely a downside. The cushion and the time period in which we could manage is reduced. But I'm hearing that it's not necessarily an immediate impact. Unless we get into that emergency, it's not necessarily going to affect.
It's not a tomorrow issue.
And it's not a bond sales issue, it's not.
Correct, if the city is expecting to have a bond sale, like if they're contemplating that, then I think we have multiple things that would play, into it right now. One, we need to catch up on our financial statements, that would be a big one. Two, having a better reserve would be good, but they overall look at the budget to see what are your revenue sources. It's not very isolated, I guess I would say. They look at your revenue sources. Do you have a steady stream, right? Is it volatile? So there's a lot more going on when it comes to evaluating the city overall and what the sources are of revenues and how we're spending it. Are we totally going offline and, it looks crazy. So there's a lot more that goes into it. It's a lot more complicated than just this.
Well, I think what emerged if this keeps happening and that we're not achieving that 15%, then it becomes sort of a de facto reserve policy. So we're not there yet, I don't believe, but that would be something to talk about. So let me ask one more question.
Well, maybe we should just
Just one more? This one? Yeah, give me one more. Because this
I
would be
do want
different.
to let other folks have a chance to ask questions.
Okay, go
but-
ahead. I'll come back if there's more.
Okay, that'd be great. Darian, did you have any questions?
Nothing big, and I think this is really good. I guess I would, think about just, just in terms of clarifying, one would be this issue, the budget is dependent on development, but as we talked about in connection with Village Farms, given the, pathetic share of the property tax City of Davis gets, right, there's a real issue. And so just explain the difference between those two things, right? That we get new development, we're gonna get this tiny slice of the property tax. That might not be enough to fund services to this new community, but you will get this one-time infusion of development fees, which we were expecting, which we're not getting. So I just feel like there's it'll be an interesting thing to understand. The other thing that would be interesting to understand, because I think people feel like, well, we just approved this tax increase, and so that's enough for improving all the roads, a bigger reserve fund, a pony in every backyard, and why don't we have these things? And I think that to some extent, I think your answer is, given the increase in, say, labor costs, our single biggest expense, that in and of itself is more than enough to gobble up this additional money. And so I didn't see a chart breaking that out, right, showing, given the COLAs and the labor contracts, or alternatively, how much trouble is Woodland in, or right, and what's their deficit look like? I think that just so people understand and be appreciative that we're able to keep the lights on, right, because of this $11 million. I think that would be like a useful exercise. It doesn't change the budget, but I do think it helps to create perspective. I think the other thing related to that, which I also think of maybe our first meeting, but there was a cool chart about where the City of Davis spends its money. And one of the things in that chart that was striking was we spend a bigger percentage of our money on parks and recreation than most places, which I think we're all pretty happy about. But I think emphasizing that that in fact we're not just a regular city that way. There are actually amenities that people like that we're spending money on because we want to. So I think that would also be like a useful thing to put in there.
I do want to just make a quick comment on,
please.
When we were putting together fiscal year 25 budget, so mid-cycle update that happened, and even 24, we already knew that the city was operating in a deficit. So part of the reason why the city was looking into, we need a revenue source. Because I believe, sorry, going by memory at this point, but I want to say we were in deficit spending in that particular year of like $5 million. So, I mean, that alone, that's to keep the lights on. And then, as I mentioned, as we were going through some of the assumptions, we had some increases that weren't expected. And frankly, outside of the city control, I mean, I understand labor could be to a point control,
That's the other thing, if you
because-
also show like, I mean, as you know, right, all these different groups talk to each other, right? So if the employees in a different city get a 3% rate cut, then Davis is basically gonna have to give the same thing, right? So which is, it's not a criticism, just an explanation of like, how you, and I think people would like, don't in general don't understand, like, you gave it 3%, why did you do it? Well, we have to, every other city did, we need to be competitive with them.
So, but I just want to make sure, because I don't want for it to be a perception that, and I don't think the city,
Yeah.
at least city staff did not ever say that, in my opinion, is that the new tax was strictly going to be for new things.
Yeah.
We were very specific, as we need to have additional revenues in order to maintain and preserve current services, not just add new things.
Yeah.
So, whether there was a different perception perhaps at some point, I don't know, but at least when the presentations were done, when at least I was there, done to council on a budget, the point was, we don't have revenues to cover the expenses we currently have.
Right, but then also showing that, right, showing the $5 million deficit last year
Correct.
that we've now
Yes.
eliminated, I mean, that would be great. That's all I got.
So we're gonna have follow-up on that, because that was the next comment I wanted to make. So thank you for making that comment there, because I think that was my, there's a judgment call on these staff reports, how big, but I thought that was something that could improve the staff report, and maybe we could talk about in the subcommittee, is that the Measure Q is listed as one of the opportunities, and it is and was an opportunity. And I think Darius had it right. I think there were some expectations that because of this opportunity, that all the roads would be fixed or something. Okay, that was never staff's, I understand staff's projection of it or the council's. I think there should be an addition, explanation, just for the public to be transparent. You described it, I think I'm quoting you at the beginning, we would have a very different budget if Measure Q, so you're talking about significant services reductions. And we don't know what that would have been, because that would have been part of the discussion. But I think that would be helpful to the public to know that in addition to keeping services, there's also been these cost increases. We've talked about some of them, but this insurance increase, it was, I would say, a black swan event. I mean, maybe the more savvy insurance people, you got this, you got all these additional costs that could be listed. And I think that kind of transparent explanation would be good for the public, and understand it a little bit better. There'll be, I'm sure, folks will disagree, but that's okay. Let them comment on that. So thank you for raising that. That was actually my next point too.
I guess some of the things, I mean, I would just echo is comparisons with other cities. Like that's, I think, just helpful in contextualizing this, because you see just a number, but if you don't know how that compares to maybe similar size cities or nearby cities, it's helpful to have that information, I think. And so that's just a recommendation that I have for inclusion, so that folks can see that. And then even just right here, these are some capital improvement projects. I guess how deferrals are prioritized on capital projects, and then what the implications of those deferrals are in the long term, I think could just be helpful for folks to understand that this needs to be done, because otherwise the costs could be this in the future, and showing that the things that maybe would have the highest, I don't know if the things that have the highest long-term costs, if they're not taken care of, are the ones that are prioritized, but maybe just how that prioritization works. But by the city manager's office would be something that could be helpful and provide good context to some of these numbers.
I think part of one of the budget workshops that's going to be for council, our expectations we're going to actually bring to do a little more detailed or more deeper dive, I guess I would say, on the capital projects, which were to include which ones didn't make the list, call it that way. So there was going to be an additional discussion just to make sure that everyone understands that the list that was submitted was this big, but we could only fund so many projects.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and I think that's really important to show which ones were deferred, but then also maybe in addition to that, by deferring those, these are the costs that will be incurred by those ones that were deferred. And just so that people understand that that's, you know, there will be additional costs in the future, and that's just that's the rub. And so I think kind of having those two pieces are helpful for people in understanding, like just the community and understanding why things are deferred, and then where in the future costs come up, like why they're going where they're going. That's just like my suggestion.
Yeah, so this to me is like we're deferring so much, and properly should, to the engineering judgment. You get the Public Works Department, they're the civil engineers, and they're doing these kinds of useful lives of this and making judgments, and any explanation of that is I think helpful.
I guess the other piece and on the staffing and the hiring, like I think I agree that it's, you know, obviously I'm definitely not going to weigh in on what's needed, and I think the city manager's office knows best. Just curious though, is there, in terms of grants, do folks on staff apply for grants, or is there someone on staff whose role it is, or a contractor who applies for grants for the city? Maybe that would be a good use of money to have somebody dedicated to grants.
We don't have one single person. So for example, social services and housing, they oversee any of the, I'm gonna call housing grants, CDBG, home, any, so those are more of an allocation type of grants, but there are competitive grants that they apply for, whether it's state or federal. So they do the application on their own, so they don't necessarily do it for, let's say, another department in the city. Public Works does their own for Public Works capital projects related items. There are only so many grants that are available, or type of grants. Usually it's more of a capital type of grants, and not more of your ongoing funds staff. So there are some grants that I know our utilities and operations receives. They were more for like recycling type of grants, or the waste related under the new AB 1383 kind of requirements. So there's some assistance they get with that. Obviously there's grants such as FEMA grants for mutual aid and things like that fire and police provide. So there are grants like that, and where city is deeming it important to apply for grants, and that grant will be needed and we can actually utilize it, we do. We have a consultant for the entire city that kind of assists us with more of a, here's the available grants. So I think staff actually does go through an evaluation process for each of their own department of saying, yes, this grant is available, but for example, it requires a match, but I don't have a match, right? So maybe there's I'm gonna guess that there's a conversation if need be, depending on what type of grant it is. Is there ability to find a match? Depends on how much it is. That could be utilized. Sometimes there are grants that, well, they would be great to get, but they're more on a wish list or nice to have rather than we need to have it. So do you fund something and maybe provide a match for something you need to have versus, or would be nice, right? So I think there's a lot of the process of evaluation that happens on the grants. There's no one single person that actually works on it. Each department has, evaluates what the work is, what's available.
I guess like last night during the city council meeting, what I heard was that maybe there are certain activities that like nonprofits within the community or like other entities could be kind of covering. And so I think my thought was also like, is there someone within the city who can even be assisting like local nonprofits in applying for grants that might be relevant to them if they can do some like community education or like some other work that could kind of take some of the load off of the city.
I'm not sure if I'm able to really answer that question, at least not right now, because I do know that our social services and housing have conversations with, certain nonprofits that they deal with as it relates to, if it relates to homelessness or things like that. So they have certain conversations, they have their relationships built with certain nonprofits and work with them. Again, I do not know if there is, well, right now, there's not a dedicated person who does that. I know Parks and Community Services works with, for example, Sacramento Foundation, where some of the donations go to, so that's how the splash pad contributions happened, where the donations were accepted, and it's done through them. So there's certain things that are happening and work that, but I think it really depends on what the nonprofits are for, which a lot of them I think would be, sounds like related more to, I'm gonna call it housing and social services type of work. So we currently have staff that work with them. I cannot tell to what extent, like how involved that work is.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's like if that was included in contractual or if that's something that the staff takes on, but I think it's sort of like as needed, the staff takes on.
I think that, could you just speak a little bit more loudly? You got this fan over my head.
Oh.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
just,
thank you.
my question was just whether or not that's kind of handled by the staff or if there's somebody who is kind of dedicated, or by staff just, in addition to their regular duties, or if there's somebody dedicated to that, but that answers my question. But maybe that's something that, I don't know that there is extra money because it's a tight budget, but if there's, maybe that's if the city has a need that, like during the city council meeting last night where it was kind of mentioned that there might be nonprofits, that could handle some things, like maybe extra money could be put towards helping those nonprofits find grants to support work that the city would like to do. I don't know, that's just a suggestion. But do either of you have any other questions? Okay.
No, I like that idea.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, go ahead. I can't decide one, but I can do it now.
Where, if at all, is there anything reflected in the budget about the down payment assistance program?
No, it is not right now. So I'm gonna say, there isn't really capacity for a new program at the moment, so it is not part of the current budget. My understanding is right now that that program hasn't necessarily even been, set up.
Right.
That's probably gonna be coming up either at a later date once there's a little more certainty about the program, and then two, figuring out what the funding will be.
Because we've heard also rumors that there's $1 million pot of gold for this program. I just want to make sure there isn't such a thing.
Yeah, I think when they were talking about it at the December meeting, they were sort of throwing around maybe $1 million, maybe $2 million to put into it, but it sounds like it was dependent on how the budget shook
I
out.
think, and I cannot say I'm with 100%.
Because I think Mayor Bartlett said last night at the city council meeting, like, that it's unfortunate that there's nothing to put into the
I
affordable
think the
housing
idea
fund.
was to take it out of potentially the new
Oh,
revenue measure, the new 1%
Mhm.
to move it over to a program. So the question would be, if we do that, what do we take out?
Because the budget is, got, okay, well, that's very helpful to know.
So
there's really, it's in terms of opportunity cost, it's really a zero-sum game. I think this is definitely $1 million that has to come from the police department or something, okay. Got it, great.
That's helpful for a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other line item that I saw that was startling to me was the $2 million for irrigation. Is that, I don't even know how to I'm sure it's not a popular thing because I know parks are beloved in Davis, but I guess at one point did we consider that budget can't be so high for irrigation and we're gonna have to go to low water plants and change the structure of it? I'm guessing that's mostly to cover all the beautiful big grassy fields we've got to keep them
with
green.
big grassy fields and the trees.
Yeah.
So
Slide
the tree-
7, by the way, if you want to move it.
if the trees are not, knows? If the trees are not watered, unfortunately, I'm assuming they're gonna die and fall, I'm gonna guess. The irrigation in the last, I would say 2 or 3 years, kind of ended up being in that area, like, I think it was 2 years ago, it was 1.8 million. I think last year it came up to 1.9, so we expect it to be, about $2 million as we have a splash pad. That's going to be an additional water use. So, it's watering, it's not just the parks itself, it's the medians, as well. So whatever is city is responsible for, the greenery that you see around, that covers that.
So that 1 million in addition, was that a recovery of previous costs that, a
No,
couple
that's
years ago?
not.
This is a new, this is 5 years ago, we weren't spending, we were spending a baseline amount, and now we're gonna increase that. And the reason is because the determination is that the current spending is insufficient to provide the appropriate water needed for the vegetation.
Correct.
And is most of that electricity cost? Is that where the money?
No, that's actual water cost.
That's the actual purchasing the water, that the biggest utility, okay.
Yes, so unfortunately, because it is a utility fund, water
Yeah, I get
utility, we can't subsidize it. It's not allowed by Property 218, it's the law. So everyone, including the city, has to pay its fair share.
So we could translate that million into a total amount of water, because it's just for water, so we could translate that into how much additional water we're actually talking about in gallons or acre feet, right? That's plus or minus.
That's water that's already being used, so, I don't think it's any additional, it's what we currently pay, we just have a budget that's low, and so we're increasing it to what the baseline should be. So this is not.
So this is not more water, we're not, it's just increased cost, but it's not more water.
Well, the only more water that's going to be, I'm going to assume, is going to be a splash pad. We have pools, we have irrigation.
Yeah, I'm trying to think from an environmental water standpoint, do we need more water than we're currently providing today, next year, to keep the vegetation sustainable? That could be one increase in cost, more water, or it's just the water that we're using now is getting more expensive and it'll be more expensive.
Well, that too, so it depends really, because if you think about it from a water standpoint, right? You either have higher consumption, or you reduce the consumption because of conservation reasons, right, which state enacted originally. The Davis overall is doing it for climate action purposes. You use less, but we still have to maintain a certain level of infrastructure and everything else, so then the cost goes up. So it's one or the other. You do good on one, you pay the other.
I have one additional question. So you mentioned that when developers don't build out properties, and because there are some financing issues or anything like that, then I'm guessing the city incurs some sort of maybe it's not like a direct cost, but this is a vacant land, people don't like it, it doesn't look nice, it's not, there's just costs that are just externalities, I suppose. But can the city charge some sort of tax or fee to these properties that are not being built, kind of like a vacancy tax? So obviously it's not a property that's been built that's vacant, but if they don't build, then is there some fee that the city charges or could make money on? I don't know.
Well, I don't believe there's something in place right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if there was a conversation. I thought at one point there was something contemplated maybe to that sort. I don't know when or how, and then COVID happened, at least in my period with the city. So, but right now in terms of expenditures, so any work, what I'm going to call a pre-development into approval of a project, a lot of the time developers already pay for the services of the city to go through the approvals and all that. Generally speaking, the land is not city owned, so we don't actually do, I'm going to call it per se work on it, call it irrigation or, cutting the grass or the weeds, I should say, whatever it is, right? Depends on how that area looks. So then are not responsible, the developer is whoever owns the land. Now, that doesn't exclude us from, potentially policing services, code enforcement, things like that. So if there's something going on, I mean, those areas are subject in the same way as anywhere else in the city. But I can't necessarily speak to, just,
I guess is that
Not
something
aware of
that's like illegal, like putting in some sort of a tax?
I think San Francisco does one of those, has a vacancy tax, and there's been a bill to try to pass one statewide, like a vacancy tax, but I don't think
Okay.
it's.
There's another version of that you could do, which is you could charge a per square foot charge, so a parcel tax on unbuilt, undeveloped square footage according to the general plan. Right, so you're telling the state, here's how much development should happen here. The longer the person, and you're gonna have to pay that much no matter what. So you might as well do it. Whereas now, you only collect developer fees if they do it.
correct.
So would be the reverse.
The city has a lot of leverage on any approved development. They put the developer on the clock, and if they don't act, then they have to resubmit. But I want to make sure the two members of the public have a chance.
One quick question.
No. Sure.
Just regarding the city's water and irrigation use, specifically, you have to pay our fair share, right? Would it be possible to institute, obviously it wouldn't help for this budget, a water recovery fee, maybe through the property tax base, that just covers the city's water use, and basically offload that burden onto all of the residents? Because obviously, residents need to fund the entire city's services. Water is one of those things. Would that be a legal way to do that?
Well, if it's a separate tax, it has to be voted by the residents, so we can't just impose a tax. I mean, technically you can argue we use currently tax dollars, property tax, sales tax, transactions in the TOT, transient occupancy tax, you name it, right? All the revenue sources we currently have to cover those costs. So I would assume some residents might argue it that way, to say that, we're already paying for it. So, but as I said, if it's something new, it would have to be voted
Would it be
on.
collected through the utility billing system?
Well, it depends. If it's paying for, so we currently have park maintenance tax, right, which is only $1.6 million. The budget for our parks and community services is probably $12 to $13 million. So it dropped in the bucket. My understanding is in the past, when it was approved, we included the COLA increase to cover it, but obviously it's not nearly sufficient. So it needs to be increased a lot more. But again, this will be something that we'll have to take to the voters in that way. But again, we can't really do it through utility charge because each type of owner has to pay their own fair share. We can't shift over a burden of what the city would pay onto, let's say, residents.
I think if there aren't any other pressing questions, I wanted to open it up to public comment unless you had to clarify, okay. But I'd like to just open it up to public comment in case, okay. Would you like to make is there any recorded?
So you've all received an email from Elaine Musser, and I think there was one also from Joint, Elaine Musser and Dan Carson. There were two that were submitted, so I think you all received it. Other than that, we have not received any others.
Okay. Well, I wanted to just circle back to the concept of the subcommittee to delve more deeply into the budget. Is there, I think, who's interested in, or who has the time? Because this would be a little bit of a short turnaround, given that the next discussion would be on the 4th of June.
I'm interested, we can't do it. I gotta go right now. My daughter's broke her wrist yesterday. I gotta go to bed, so.
Sorry, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I I'm limited on bandwidth, but I can do it if no one else will.
No, I'm definitely in,
Okay.
so,
Okay.
but, and my suggestion would be, the goal would be to produce a written product for the June meeting for this group. I'm not thinking of something as extensive as the staff, or not close, but a 2-page written product that could be submitted as part of the agenda material, so people can think about it, and then when we get to the meeting, we'd have a set of ideas, might be a set of proposals, I don't know, but ideas or recommendations. And then if the commission goes with them, great, if not, that's okay too. And there could be other suggestions that come out of just the commission that are independent of what the subcommittee comes.
Certainly, like during the
Yeah,
meeting, okay.
So just like a starting point.
It's
like
a starting for the
a jumping
conversation,
off.
yeah.
Okay, so I think that I've heard you, anybody else like to volunteer for this one? Just keep in mind bandwidth, because, it
And
would
I
be.
just want to also
Yeah.
point out, because the meeting is on the 4th, the agenda must be published on Friday, so if we can get the whatever
Yeah, I
product
know,
it's
so
going
it's
to be
even
on
tighter,
Thursday.
it's even tighter. So, Mike, as I was careful, it would be a goal to put something in writing. If we failed, then there we are, maybe you get a PowerPoint or something, but
So by when, sorry, it would have to be by when?
I would say probably by no later than hopefully afternoon on the 29th.
yeah,
So it's about a week.
so yeah, so it's about a week, right?
Well, I mean, I'd
So-
be happy to volunteer as well.
So I'm available on Monday if we want to do a conference call or something.
So I think in order to establish a subcommittee, have to make a motion suggesting that,
Sure.
I would be on that subcommittee, Leslie, David, and I would just be, would anyone like to second that motion?
I will second.
Okay.
Excellent.
So we have, I guess then,
And would anybody, is there any other discussion? So the discussion would be just the logistics of
yeah,
this?
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So there's 2 or 3?
Three.
3. You're on?
Me.
Okay,
That's-
so are you available or you want to get it clarified with the vote? So, yeah, I don't think there's any, it's good.
Okay.
Is everyone, yes?
So is there anybody opposed? Abstentions?
Okay.
Okay, then, I think we'll have established that subcommittee, and then, we can probably figure out logistics.
Sure, I'm going to propose Monday.
Okay, and I think with that, we can, adjourn the meeting. Unless I'm missing something that I was supposed to have done, okay, cool. Okay, well, great, so by 8, and we could probably figure out logistics for when to meet.
So for me, I know I'm open Monday at noon, but folks may have a conflict then. If you're open then, I know I'm open then. I could probably do something to early that afternoon. That would work. I just don't know, because I just think sometimes people are open at noon.
So Monday, is that Memorial Day?
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I,
53.
you want to do Tuesday at noon then?
we could, would,
Tuesday?
yeah.
Are you not free Monday at all?
No, I think well,
I could do, because I can